All right, so right now you actually know more than maybe you think you know. So remember, if you're doing order of operations forward, say something like this, you would square first, multiply by 3, and get 75. So think about if you're solving an equation that looks like this, you would do everything backwards because you don't know what x is. You're solving for x, so you would do reverse order of op. So here you squared first, then multiply by 3. So if you went backwards, you would divide by 3 and then square root. So just do order of op backwards on these, and you actually can figure these out without even really knowing how to do each individual one specially. Just know you're undoing order of op. So I'm going to pause, and you go ahead and try those, and we'll see what you come up with. All right, so if we look at this first one, if I was doing order of op forwards, I would square. So to undo squaring, I'm going to square root. Now there's a little issue with this. We're actually going to get two answers. Because if I have something like x squared and I sub in 5, I get 25, which is great. But if I sub in a negative 5, notice I also get 25. So I really don't know what the answer is. And notice the degree is 2. So there are two possible answers here. Not guaranteed, but in this case there are. So here, when you see an exponent of 2, you should be expecting two answers, and do not mess that up on the test. I'm just warning you, there's going to be two answers there. All right, let's undo order of op here. If I knew what t was, say t was 5, I would sub it in. I would do my exponent first, and then I would multiply. So I'm going backwards. So if I'm going to go backwards, I would undo my order of op. So I'm going to divide by 4 first, right? Because I multiplied by 4 last. And then I'm going to square root to undo the squaring. So just think about, if you knew what t was, what would you do first? What would you do second? And then do the reverse. So to get rid of that, or multiplying by 4, I'm going to divide by 4. And to get rid of squaring, I'm going to square root. And again, same issue as before, you're going to get two answers here, plus or minus 10. So it could be a positive 10 or a negative 10. Now, again, just like we did earlier when we did equations, the nice thing about equations is you can check your answers. So you should know if you're right or wrong before you ever enter any answer in MyMathLab or anything. So let's check our answer here. 4 times 10 squared, 4 times 100, that is 400. And then if I shove in a negative 10, I still get 400, so I'm good. Same thing over here. 20 times 20 is 400. A negative 20 times a negative 20 is 400. So all of those so far, I know that I have done right. All right, I'm going to erase a little bit. Let's look at the next one. So the next one is the square root of y is 9. So to undo square rooting, you would square. So what I'm going to do is I am going to square both sides to undo it. So square this side and this side, and I get y equals 81. Square rooting and squaring cancel, so I get 81. Now check your answer. Square root of 81 really is 9, so you know you're right. All right, let's look at this one. If I was doing order of op and I was given something like this, and say that I was supposed to sub in, oh, I don't know, we'll say y equals 3. If I was supposed to sub in 3, I would multiply first and get 9, and then I would square root last. So I would multiply by 3 first and square root last. So I am going backwards. So what that means is I have to reverse those guys. I can't do them the same thing. So to get rid of square rooting, I would square. To get rid of multiplying by 3, I would divide by 3. So that's exactly what I'm going to do on this one. So I know I'd multiply first and then square root. So I'm going to square first. And the squaring only cancels out the square rooting. It doesn't impact that 3y. And I get that. To get rid of multiplying by 3, I would divide by 3. Y is 27. And again, I can check my answer to make sure I'm right. This eraser is kind of slow here. I think I can maybe select it all and erase. I'll have to try that later. So if I sub in, let's try that. So square root of 3 times 27. So I'm just subbing in my answer to check it. Square root of 81 is 9, and it balances with 9, so I know I'm right. And again, what you're really doing here is, like, if you have the square root of, say, 9 squared, If you did order of operations, the square root of 9 would be 3. 3 squared, oops, that's squared, is 9. And notice squaring cancels the square rooting. So the symbols cancel each other. The 9 is still what's left because those are inverse operations. And inverse operations undo each other, kind of like adding to and subtracting to. That's really what you're doing there as well. You're just undoing it by doing order of op backwards, and those cancel. All right, let's look at the last two. These ones are a little tricky, and there's kind of multiple ways of doing them. This is a reciprocal. Is everyone okay? The reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2, or the reciprocal of 3/4 is 4/3. So they just took, say, 8, and the reciprocal is 1/8. So x, if you flip it, you get 1 over x. So I don't really like having that x down there. So I'm going to undo the reciprocal function. And to undo the reciprocal function, you can just flip both. Now, some of you might be like, where did that one go? Well, it's there. You just don't have to write it. So what I did is I reciprocated both sides. And so that's one way to get the answer, is that puts my x in the numerator. And so if I reciprocate, I get that. The other thing you could do is, if you want to leave it as is, there's an invisible 1 under that 8. You could do a proportion. So you could cross multiply here. And then when you cross multiply, you get 8x equals 1 times 1 is 1. And then you always divide by the number by the x, so to get rid of multiplying. And notice that still gives you the same answer. So there's some other options there. Same thing here. This has a reciprocal function. But notice it also has a times 2 in there. So we're going to have to deal with both of them. So I know I'm going to have to reciprocate, and I know I'm going to have to divide by 2 eventually. So I'm going to flip both. And again, I would probably not write that because it doesn't mean anything. And then to get rid of multiplying by 2, I would do divide by 2. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you, especially with this fraction over here, it might be easier, instead of multiplying by 2, to use a fraction like a half, especially since you have a fraction over here, because dividing by 2 and multiplying by a half are the same thing. Or the reciprocal of 2 is a half. Those are going to cancel. And I get 1/16. Again, if you don't like that, you could make a proportion out of this, because you have a single fraction equal to a single fraction. All you have to do is put a 1 under there. Again, you can cross multiply. And you get what? 16x equals 1. And then to get rid of multiplying by 16, you do the inverse, which is divide by 16. And you still get 1/16. Now, can you check your answers on these? Yeah. On a calculator for this one, you take 1, hit your division key, and then put it in parentheses, 1/8, and hit enter. And it will give you the 8. Same thing over on this one. You're going to have to be a little more careful when you check this one because of that times 2. But you're going to do 1, hit your division key, parentheses, 2 times, and you can use your little fraction key to get 1/16, and then enter, and it should give you that 8. If not, we made a mistake. All right, let's pause, read the rest of this page, and then we'll pick up on the next page. Okay, hopefully you read the bottom of that page, and then now we're in the top of the next one. So I'm trying to think what page. I'm going to pause here and make sure I have the right page number. Okay, so hopefully you read the next couple pages. I'm on page 374. And just a couple of things to highlight is that, again, what we're doing is we're undoing order of operations. So if I give you an equation like, say, 3x plus 8, or even maybe a squared in there, equals, say, oh, I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter, 11 or something like that. If you knew what x was, okay, so pretend you don't know the equals 11. Say that x equals 1. You would sub 1 in. You would square it. 1 times 1 is 1. You would multiply, and you get 11. And so then you would suddenly know the answer. So what's happening when we solve equations is you know the answer, but you don't know what x is. And so you're going to try to, and you don't want to sit there and guess and test because it might be a decimal or a fraction. I picked a nice number, but in real life, you don't always get nice numbers. So what you do is you do the reverse of what you did going forward. So what did we do first? We subbed in, and then what did we do? We squared, and then we multiplied by 3, and then we added 8. So if you're solving it, what's going to happen is you're going to do these backwards. So I know when I solve this in real life, I would square first, then I'd multiply by 3, and then I'd add the 8 last. And so I'm going to go backwards. So to get rid of adding 8, I'm going to subtract 8. And again, remember, equations are balances, so we're trying to keep everything balanced. To get rid of multiplying by 3, I'm going to divide by 3. And to get rid of square rooting, I'm going to square root. Now, this is the only part you have to be super, super careful. You are going to get 2 answers, and do not forget that on the test. If there's an exponent of 2, you should expect 2 answers. That doesn't mean there's always 2, because, for example, if x squared equals 0, obviously you can't have positive or negative 0, so you just get that. But in general, you're going to get 2 answers here. And so up here, I only subbed in 1, but notice if I would have subbed in a -1, oops, that would have been positive, and I still would have gotten the same answer. So you really don't know when you undo it for sure which one it was. All right, so quadratics have 2 answers if you have an exponent. So let's undo this one. Okay, so let's think about what you would do first. If you knew what x was, you would what? Add 8 first, and then after you add 8, you would square it. So we are going to do that in reverse. So to get rid of square rooting, we would square. So go ahead and square both sides. And let's see, those cancel. X plus 8 equals, all right, I got to grab my calculator here. What are we squaring? 64. So I got 4,000. Oh, shoot. I don't know what just happened. All right, I'm going to have to, all right, I'm going to pause it here for just a second. Okay, we should be good now. 4,096, and I just squared that. And then we added 8 first, so to undo that, we would have to subtract 8. So I'm going to subtract 8. And on my calculator, if I subtract 8, I get 4,088. And again, you want to check your answers. So sub it in, so add 8 to that, and then square root that answer. And I get 64. So I just sub in my answer, which is what? I added it, right? Which was my 4,096. And then I square rooted it, and I really did get 64. So then I know I'm right. Okay, go ahead and try the next 2, see how these go, and then we'll come back. All right, so let's look at this one. If I knew what x is, I would square first, and after I did that, I'd add the 8. So this time I'm undoing that. So to get rid of adding 8, I'm going to subtract 8. And then to get rid of squaring, I'm going to square root. And again, this is a quadratic, so no, you're going to get 2 answers, because 11 times 11 is 121. A -11 times a -11 is. So again, when you see an exponent of 2 like that, expect 2 answers. And again, you can check 11 squared plus 8 really is 129. And if you sub in a negative times a negative is a positive, and you still get 129. So since they're both balanced, we know we're right.